Well, I hope that everybody in the room enjoys Bates Motel as much as I do, because I think it's a terrific show, and also a really daring show, because you know, when you think about taking on something as iconic as that movie and turning it into a weekly television show, you know, totally set in a contemporary period, is a very inventive idea. So tell us how it came about, Carlton.
Well, first off, we meant to have a clip, but there were some technical issues. So what I can do is previously on Bates Motel.
Yeah, that's his voice. That is Carlton's voice.
That's the best I can do. So basically what happened was I was approached by a couple of executives at Universal Television who said, Universal owns the rights to the Psycho franchise, and we're really interested in doing something with it, and we actually have partners at A&E who are very interested in this concept. Would you want to do it? And they were like, well, you know, I'm like, what is it? And they were like, you tell us. You know, what happens with me normally is I'll just take you know, when I get pitched an idea, I'll ruminate about it, and then it just depends on, after a few days, if I'm still thinking about it, then I kind of feel like, okay, this is something I could pursue. This is something I could you know, do something with. And I found myself kind of thinking about Psycho and this idea of Norma and Norman Bates, and the idea of, well, maybe taking these characters and moving them to a kind of a contemporary setting and changing things up and really doing not a reverential adaptation, not something that was set in period, but something that was a little bit more you know, extreme. So I expressed some interest, presented a few initial ideas to A&E. They were very responsive, and I said, yeah, I'd like to pursue this, but I really would love to find someone to work on this with. And I had the very good fortune of being introduced to Carrie Aaron, who was a writer who had a deal with Universal Television. And Carrie and I think had met previously and very briefly, maybe 10 years earlier. We sat down and we started talking about it, and we instantly clicked. I mean, we each had sort of a subset of ideas about the show, and they really meshed. And it was just, I love working collaboratively. I'm not, my favorite thing is not to sit in the room with the blinking cursor of the computer and just, and stare at that. I like writing, but I like writing once it's been worked out in collaboration with other writers, and I love particularly the one-on-one collaboration with a like-minded creative person. And so, as Carrie and I started talking about it, there were a few things that emerged, and one was, first thing that was really interesting is that Norma Bates might be one of the most iconic characters in the history of cinema, but we actually know nothing about her. She is a corpse, and we hear her voice. And so Carrie and I decided rather early on that it would really be interesting. I think the expectation from watching the movie Psycho is that Norma is a shrew who sort of berated her son into being crazy. But what if, in fact, she was a loving mother who adored her son, but her son had a flaw in his DNA, and she is trying desperately with sort of every fiber of her being to keep him from becoming the guy that he's going to become. And in fact, her sort of smothering, loving, super intense presence is what actually catalyzes his turn into becoming this serial killer. The other thing we started thinking about was, well, what this really is a great tragedy. We know where this character is going to end up. The people who are watching this show know kind of what happens to Norman Bates at the end of this movie. And tragedy is a great storytelling form. I mean, it's worked for a long time. It was the staple of the ancient Greeks and Shakespeare. Titanic is a great tragedy. I mean, if you think about it, you know that things are not going to probably go too well for that ship, but you're rooting for Kate and Leo and hoping that maybe something good will happen for them, but it doesn't. But if you go to a network and say, "Hey, we're coming in to pitch you a tragedy," you get psyched. That's not going to go very well either. But fortunately, we had fantastic partners at A&E who were incredible. So let me finish some of the other ideas that we came up with. So then, we really locked into this idea of doing the show as a contemporary show. It felt like doing it period would put the show so much in the shadow of the iconic Hitchcock film that it would just never have a chance to get traction there. So we thought, let's take these characters, we'll take the iconic imagery, which in a way I was influenced a lot by Christopher Nolan and his treatment of Batman. He took the sort of iconographic things from Batman and told a wholly kind of fresh story across 3 movies. So I thought, well, we'll kind of do something similar here. We'll take the motel, we'll take the house, we'll take these characters, but we'll define them in a different fashion than they were in the original movie, and we'll throw them in this contemporary environment of White Pine Bay, Oregon, and we'll see what happens. So we went in and we presented this to A&E, and they were incredibly responsive. I think they immediately saw the potential for a show that would be sort of, on the one hand, a very nuanced character drama and a story of a mother and her relationship with her son, with this sort of high-octane crime stuff, which gave us narrative propulsion. And they embraced it, and they really initially and very early on said, after we'd actually completed a couple of scripts, they said, we want to go straight to episodes, and committed to order 10 episodes and go straight to series. And we got nothing but incredible support from them. And I mean, that was really liberating, because I think what we were doing, was hard for a lot of other people to figure out. I think some of the critics initially, when they watched the show, were like, "What is this? What are you doing?" And
they have cell phones now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, one of the things stylistically we did was try to make Norma and Norman's relationship feel out of time. So when you see them at the beginning of the pilot, she's got a vintage car. They arrive at this motel, the house. Nothing is new. And then suddenly Norman is sitting at the bus stop, and he's got iPhone earbuds in his, and you're like, wait. And then a beautiful girl pulls up in a modern BMW. So the idea was, in a way, that their relationship was out of time, but that in 2013, 14, whatever, it just isn't appropriate for the most important relationship in your life to be between a mom and a son, or there comes a point where there has to be a separation. But what happens when the parties don't really want to separate? So that was sort of also part of the driving force. So we sort of took all those things together, and that became the jumping off point. And I think, like all good television, you kind of try to create the cocktail of elements, and then as writers you start talking about them and seeing what you can do with them, and that was how we started creating stories.
It's interesting. This just occurred to me, but you're really not doing the movie, as you pointed out, and the characters are actually from a book, right?
They are, yes.
So did you get the rights to the book and not the movie?
Well, I think the rights to the book were part of the rights to the movie. I mean, Universal owned all the package of the rights to the Psycho franchise, which presumably included the underlying book. Okay,
but I mean, is there any Hitchcock estate attachment to this?
No.
No.
I mean, we actually did hunt down the original plans of the Psycho house from the Universal Archives, and our production designer, Mark Freeborn, who also did Breaking Bad, used those plans to construct the house.
The house is still on the lot, isn't it?
Well, it's a replica. I mean, the house on the lot is a 3/4 scale replica. So when you walk in there, you feel gigantic. But it looks good from the tram. Yeah. It's also next to...
Well, the inside of the house is also the same as it is in the movie, right? The stairs, isn't it?
Well, the inside of the house on the lot is not fully dressed.
No, right.
But ours is like the movie.
Yours
yeah,
looks
no,
like
we
the
actually
movie,
used the real plans, and we very carefully modeled the construction of the house on the original movie plans. And there was no way to do it on the tour. I mean, you can't. And also, you have like Dr. Seuss Land right next to the motel. Is very disconcerting to try to shoot.
Does the motel look the same?
The motel looks the same in its design, but we changed it up a little bit for our own production thing. The sort of the T at the end of the motel was something that we added on. So we made it sort of resemble the motel, but we made it work for our own shooting. And we actually built these structures south of Vancouver, and I mean, there are skid marks on the road where people drive down and they see it and they just stop. You know, because there's the house, and the motel. In fact, during the off season, we take down the sign, we wrap the entire Bates house in like bubble wrap and the motel. And we have a fence and a security guard to keep people from trying to stay there or photograph themselves there.
Well, the other obviously critical thing, you could never have done this without the casting that you got. And I mean, your two leads are pretty extraordinary, both because, I mean, Vera, you don't, as you said, you don't know what the character was, but Freddie is amazingly on point, it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, I credit for Freddie goes to April Webster, who casts my stuff and is an extraordinary casting director. She, you know, she does stuff for me and she does stuff for J.J. Abrams. She just most recently cast Star Wars, which she would not put me in. Despite my voice.
You could have been.
I just would have been the voice. Yeah. I was fine. I would have been. But she early on said, she said to Carrie and I, you must meet Freddie Highmore. We couldn't meet him because he was going to school at Cambridge.
Right.
So we had a Skype conversation with him, and he was great. He was, you know, smart and wonderful and delightful, but it was so early on that we had no frame of reference. So then we went on to meet probably literally 100 other candidates, and the more we saw, the more convinced we were that Freddie was the guy.
Did you know he could do American accent? He does it brilliantly, by the way.
I mean,
I think most viewers have no clue he's British.
No, I mean, the thing about Freddie is he was studying language at Cambridge University, and in fact speaks Spanish and Arabic fluently and perfectly. I like to joke with him that he's actually an MI6. I mean, there's just no way that he's not, but of course he will not admit this.
Confess.
But no, I don't think there's ever been in the history of television a star of a TV series who, in his hiatus between season 1 and season 2, went to Madrid and worked for a law firm translating documents from Spanish to English. That is not a normal hiatus activity. And people in Spain, you know, all thought he was Spanish, that his accent is so flawless in Spanish that he completely could pass as a local.
So he has a great ear that he can.
Yeah, so I think that's how he does the flawless American
And talk
accent.
about Vera.
Well, Vera, you know, it's just an interesting thing. I mean, Vera, when I write and when I'm kind of creating, I like to sort of imagine the ideal actor who I would love to have do the part that I'm thinking about. I've written a lot of dialogue for George Clooney that has never actually been said by George Clooney. But for some reason, very early on, Vera popped into my brain. I mean, if you think about like this woman who is, you know, sort of around 40, and she has to be smart and sexy and unpredictable and
a little bit
dramatic
nuts.
And a little nuts and beautiful. And I mean, it's just so hard to think of someone who can tick all those boxes. And you know, I just never thought we would get her. And so after Carrie and I finished the first 3 scripts, we sent them to her with an attached love letter. And then we got this call saying, well, Vera would actually like to do it. She'd like to talk to you guys about it. And we were just blown away. It was such an amazing, it's one of those things that, you know, also, you know, if you think about it, if you're an actor and you're 40 years old and, you know, someone's asking you to uproot your life, your kids, your family, and move to Vancouver for, you know, 5 or 6 months a year, that's an additional impediment. And so the fact that we actually got her, you know, hooked both creatively and that she was, you know, prepared to make that move was, you know, it's just those kind of wonderful elements of alchemy that happen that you can't predict. You know, you try to make a TV show as good intentioned as you are when you write something, you have to also have these other things happen. And I mean, the material helps make them happen, but they don't always happen.
Yeah, and I, as a writer, you must occasionally have the experience where the actor performs it and you think, wow, that's way better than I thought I wrote it.
This is the constant refrain that Carrie and I have with Bates. I mean, my normal reaction is that, you know, I understand my own creative cycle and process, so we'll create something and and then the script goes to Vancouver and it gets turned into a show, or in any place, and then when I watch the first cut of a show, I'm usually like somewhere between disappointed to despondent, because what happens is you have the show in your head, and you imagine
it's going to look a certain
version
way
of it, and then a director goes and translates that, and invariably it becomes something else. And so the first viewing is about sort of getting rid of that version of the show that I had in my head and accepting the one that replaces it. And it's not that it's not that it's bad. Usually, in fact, that's just the process. But what happens when we watch cuts of Bates Motel is that the performances are so exceptional, and they're kind of beyond what I imagined was possible. And so there's this kind of amazing thrill that comes with watching a cut on Bates, because Freddie and Vera just do stuff that's so, beyond. It kind of takes what's on the page and takes it to another place.
Yeah.
And that's just such a rare experience. Honestly, the biggest frustration for me about Bates is that, I think, Vera Farmiga is doing the best work on television among any actress out there, and I really feel like she deserves to be recognized for it. And
she did get an Emmy nomination.
She did get a nomination, but she didn't get one for the second season, and I really sincerely hope she gets one for the third season. I mean, what we ask of her is extraordinary.
Pretty amazing. Yeah. You also have added Max, and he's like a very interesting breakout young actor, it seems to me.
Max is. Again, I do credit to April Webster, who sort of put him on our radar screen, and I think that he is he has really grown as an actor. It was really interesting. He came back this season after filming Texas Rising for Annie, and it was, I don't know, I just felt like with age, maturity, with additional experience, whatever, he just keeps getting better and better. I mean, he was good, but now he's just. There's another level of subtlety and nuance in his performance and authenticity that's been really fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I think he could emerge as a star, that kid. I think he's really got potential. Were you worried about the risks of this? I mean, taking this on,
Well, before that, I also want to mention Olivia Cook. Who,
and she's also. And I was going to ask you about the choice of making her have, cystic fibrosis.
She was, it was really interesting. She just sent an audition tape in from Manchester, England, kind of like over the transom, and it was a little murky and fuzzy, but Carrie and I watched it and we're like, wow, she's amazing.
Knowing that there was this part, though.
Yeah, no, we had we'd written the part, and we really took an incredible flyer on her. We cast her off of this tape, and she flew on her own at age 18 from Manchester to Vancouver, and she has this really thick North English accent, Manchurian accent.
I don't think it's Manchurian.
Not Manchurian, but
it's like the headline about the ambidextrous pitcher. Did you see that? Some newspaper had a headline saying amphibious pitches. I swear that's true.
And she is just unbelievable. I mean, she is someone who I think is going to be a major star. I just saw a screening the other day of this movie that she's in called Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which won all the top prizes at Sundance, and she plays the dying girl. She seems to have a corner on the dying girl market.
Yeah.
And she's spectacular in this movie, and I think has a big career. The CF thing really came up. We have a writer who was a friend of Carrie's, who has written a couple of episodes of the show, who has has CF, and he was just a really interesting character, because he's a guy who very much lives in the present, and the kind of whole philosophy of his life has been not looking too far, not making plans, and it just seemed like a really interesting character to put in the mix, and not someone that we'd seen on television.
Yeah. Well, I was asking about, one of the things that I think is very interesting is you have a show where people think they know what the end is for sure, right? Like everything is, and I find this interesting because there are more shows like this. I think Better Call Saul is in that position. you can't, there's things you can't do with the characters if you know what happened in the other show. And similarly here, you know Norma and Norman have this end game at some point. But I believe you have other plans for them, or at least the way you get there is going to be different, right?
Well, certainly the way we get there will be different. And yeah, I mean, I think that the part of the mystery of the show is, well, what will happen to them? Are they destined to kind of have their fates be the same as what we saw in the movie? Is that going to be slightly different? You know, I mean, clearly hanging over the show and this narrative is this idea of like, you know, where is this going to go? And the movie portends that something really bad is going to happen. And
does the movie make clear that he murders his mother? It's implied.
I think it's pretty clearly implied.
Yeah.
But you know, so we have a game plan, and we're going to take them to a version of something that I think we feel will be satisfying. That won't, you know, we're not taking some dramatic left turn. But you know, to us, I think the journey getting there is interesting. I mean, the same I think is true of Better Call Saul. I mean, I think that what's important is the journey, less the ending is the ending is the ending, but it's not the thing by which, you know, the entirety of the show should be judged, just in the same as in life, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it is.
But I don't know if it concerns you, but are you aware of the audience reaction to the show, and are there a lot of viewers or some viewers that don't even know the movie, that are watching the show and they don't even know this was a movie?
You know, it feels like 25 is the cutoff, that our viewers under 25 really haven't watched the movie, and they love the show, and they don't really care about the movie. And, you know, you realize, like, I sort of realize, I have those bounce moments. I remember when my kids saw a newspaper ad for The Road to Perdition, and they were like, "You mean the guy that makes salad dressing is an actor?" You know, you go like, wow. You know, I'm not sure to what degree Psycho is on the radar screens for the entire audience, but I think we have different audiences that appreciate the show for different things, and I think we designed the show very much so that, you know, we have references to Psycho, but we try not to make the show too referential, and it feels like that kind of throws you out of the narrative. And so while we kind of find fun ways to connect it, we don't want the audience sort of sitting there watching it from the standpoint of like, oh, this is Hitchcock, this isn't Hitchcock. We want you to just be entertained with the story that we're telling, and we'll throw a few of those things in along the way.
Carlton, is this horror?
I don't really consider it horror. I mean, I think, as I said, I think for us, I think for Carrie and I, we feel like we're almost writing a romantic tragedy.
What was Hitchcock? Was Psycho considered to be? It was.
Psycho was totally horror.
The classic horror show.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and it was promoted as such. I mean, you know, I mean, Hitchcock wasn't just a fantastic director; he was an amazing promoter. I mean, they wouldn't let people in late to the screenings of the movie, and they had nurses stationed in the theaters in New York because it was so scary that you could get medical treatment if you needed. I mean, it's kind of awesome when you think about that as a way to go. But no, I think we think of it as a sort of a romantic tragedy with horror elements. You know, I think what we love about the show is that we're telling a story about a guy who is destined to become a serial killer, but we do it with heart and humor. And again, I want to applaud Carrie, my partner in crime on this, who's a beautiful and wonderful writer who writes, you know, most of the wonderful stuff that comes out of Norma's mouth. And you know, I think what we like about the show is not delivering a straight up version of it. That these characters are complicated, and that their story is heartfelt. And we really worked very hard over the first 3 seasons of the show to make you really fall in love with Norma and Norman Bates. I mean, that was the goal. And then, you know, in the next season, things will turn a little bit darker. At the end of the 3rd season, spoiler alert, you know, Norman is kind of a little unhinged. And his, you know, the journey of the 3rd season was really about this guy sort of recognizing that there was a dark side inside him, becoming aware, acknowledging it, and then sort of losing the ability to judge when he is in one persona or the other. So this sort of sets things in motion for season 4, where this character is going to be much more unpredictable and dangerous. But at the same time, we hope going into that season that the audience is deeply connected to Norman and cares about him and will be that much more emotionally invested in the final 2 years of his journey.
Well, Carlton is really one of the most prolific producers in television. He is responsible now for 4 shows. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and I just wonder how you can keep that going. It's a real challenge to do.
I'm quitting right now here on this stage.
And the other shows are The Strain, Returned, and a new show coming up called Colony, right? And how are you dividing yourself up?
I have really great partners, and I have really, I love the collaborative process. I think television functions best as a collaborative medium, and I've been doing it for a while. So I feel like I'm, pretty good and efficient at what I do, and as I said, I really do. I focus most of my time and attention on the things that matter most to me, which is really these stories, the scripts, casting and editing, and I feel I can trust my partners to do a lot of the other things, and in much greater detail. I think that when I teach in the showrunner training program that the WGA has for emerging and up and coming showrunners, and I talk a lot about the value of collaboration and really empowering people who work for you to do their jobs. And the truth is, it's very intoxicating when you're a new showrunner to be making lots of decisions, but a show doesn't fail if you pick the red car instead of the blue car, and there are plenty of talented people I work with who I think are better than I am at making a decision about, how a set should be dressed. And so I really focus on the things that I feel where I can add the most value, which is really in the storytelling, and that's the thing that I love. That's my passion, and that's why I'm doing all these shows simultaneously as like kind of a storytelling.
Do you ever get the stories crossed in your head, though? Like, well, I'm working on Bates, but that Strain story is like the same, or
surprisingly not. I have actually different offices for all the shows, and they're all within a couple of miles of each other in the San Fernando Valley. And so when I drive to one, my brain is in that one. And then also it's cable, so the shows are offset, right? So they're not all going all at the same time.
Right.
And so that also, it doesn't mean I'm working that I'm shouldering the same load on 4 shows simultaneously.
Well, let's end with this. I think I've asked this in each of the panel, but give us a little idea of what's going to happen on Bates in the next season, if you know already.
I don't really want to say too much. I mean,
I
think I've just said. I would say that as I said, Norman is a much more unpredictable character. So therefore, he is going to be driving story more than he has necessarily in the past, because his behavior is becoming more pathological. I think there's a lot of fans out there who've asked us about Norma's relationship with Sheriff Romero.
Right.
There's definitely more to come on that front. When we left at the end of last season, Emma was about to go have a lung transplant.
Right.
That's definitely going to play out.
Point. Yes.
And that's a big story that will start in the next season. And her budding relationship with Dylan is also something that we'll be exploring in the new season. So there you go.
Well, we'll look forward to that. And thanks to Carlton for filling us in on the show.
Thank you.